They came up with some type of an agreement. It was like a treaty, basically. Some type of an agreement between the American government and this, what they were deeming to be an alien race.
I was aware that we had made a deal that we would give them infrastructure, hiding places, labs, out of the human sight. I've been let privy to things that these people would be killed for if I named them.
It was not only unethical and immoral, but that it was a program that was really connected with the demonic, with satanic forces.
So the Collins elites start to get this information, to start arguing to the point where no. These things, these beings have been summoned demonically through satanic ritual. But there's not a lot of people listening.
These guys, with the resources that the U.S. government has, should have known that. They had access to people who could have told them that. So the question to ask is, why did they come up with the conclusion they did?
Finally, Los Alamos called her, and they said he died in a tragic accident, the details of which cannot be reviewed, and the body cannot be recovered. And that's why I'm telling you, be careful how hard you push, how far you push.
He has witnessed the 10-foot giants and referred to themselves as the Nephilim, said that they were preparing for an intergalactic war with God, and they believed that they were going to win.
This goes back to the beginning of civilization. Higher entities have been controlling and manipulating the governments of mankind. There's no evidence that this has stopped.
We talked last week about the spiritual nature of the UFO phenomenon and encounters with extraterrestrials, so-called extraterrestrials. For the record, we at Skywatch TV do not believe that they're actually extraterrestrial. They're extra-dimensional or interdimensional. What is the message that people are getting from these entities?
I think it varies, and that says a lot about their character, because some will say, they're from the Aldebaran or from, these different galaxies or star systems. So there is a push that they're interplanetary. But as we found out, and with the government documents dating back to 1947, they even state, the FBI states, that these are interdimensional beings. So
the FBI noted this back in the 40s.
Yes.
Yeah, this is document 6751. This is declassified. And what's interesting is that it starts off with a little bit of a disclaimer that whoever had forwarded this document said that it seems that it basically recognized that there was occultism involved in this view, but that it could be discounted because some of the information was received in occult manners, basically. So what I have to say to that is, why would you give a disclaimer and basically try to write this off, and then the document gets completely classified and forwarded to all of these people? If it's just something that, look, the FBI gets phone calls on a daily basis about stupid little theories. This was so important that it was almost like the disclaimer that was put in this document. I'm even wondering if this disclaimer was put in after the fact before they declassified it. I don't have evidence of that. That's my theory. Why do you put a disclaimer saying that these things can't be taken seriously when it's being heavily classified for so many years and then sent to all of these people in the forward list in the FBI?
And not to mention the fact that the whole purpose of the film, or one of the main points of investigation in your film, was to find out more about this secretive government organization, interagency working group called the Collins Elite, which was just their nickname for it. Why would this group even exist if this was not something that the government was taking seriously?
Exactly, and this document goes all the way back then. I mean, this is an old document, Derek. One of the things that I found interesting with this document is that there's certain words used in there that come directly out of the belief system of theosophy, going back to Madame Blavatsky. And I mean, you've got some very heavy connections here. And then the document itself was written by a very scholarly member of academia. So these are things that people are learning slowly, because you don't just go out and see this document laying on a table somewhere. You have to fish for it. And we've been through over 300 declassified documents in the course of our research, just to personally get on the level we need to be on to know what we're facing here.
The theory that has become very popular, it's spawned like 12 seasons of a show on a certain cable network, that the gods of the ancient world were just travelers from other stars. Are there contactees reporting to hearing that kind of message from these entities? In other words, we created you and now we're back to elevate humanity. What kind of how are they presenting themselves to the people that they contact?
It depends, like Wes said, it is going to depend, but a lot of times, I've even heard stories of them presenting themselves as the Elohim. This is really big in the New Age movement.
Right. There's
contacting Elohim. You know, we know Elohim is plural.
Right.
And there is some truth to the fact that they, I mean, obviously people, a Hebrew scholar would say, well, they could call themselves that if they wanted to with a little e. But regardless, to know that they're presenting themselves as Elohim in our modern, scenario, it's very chilling that they're coming with messages from heaven. And they're presenting themselves as light beings, and they're also presenting a message of universalism. This is something that's really, it kind of carries across the board that we are all created to be this one big unification. Regardless of your background, we need to put down our religions, we need to put down our politics, and we need to come together. We need to be unified.
all roads lead to heaven.
Right. Well, even the best secular researchers, Passport to Magonia, Jacques Vallée,
Yes.
and others have said these are agents of deception. They seem to carefully craft their message and modify it to try to appeal to the individual. So if a person is being abducted, but they're raised in some kind of a particular worldview, they modify their message to play off of the deeper belief systems of that individual, but then to lead them into a greater kind of deception. But it kind of reminds me, when the Antichrist comes, the Bible talks about great deception. Paul says it would be this great delusion, right? In fact, Daniel says Antichrist will be a worshiper of a God which our fathers did not know.
Right.
And Hebrew scholars have told me that can easily be translated an alien God. So as we move further into the end times and the nearness of Antichrist approaches, one would expect this kind of deception. It's building its own church. And it's ripe right now because of the decline of Western evangelical Christianity.
And that's
Very
really
true.
the key point that we're trying to make here, Tom, that this is not like in, say, the film Independence Day. We're not being prepared for a military takeover. This is really a spiritual deception. And to that end, the research that you did for Exo Vaticana and the Official Disclosure Series, on looking into what the Vatican believes about these entities and what
Right.
might be coming, the Vorg, the Vatican's observation post on Mount...
At Mount Graham.
Mount Graham, yes. Why is the Vatican taking such an interest
Well,
in this?
isn't it interesting? In last week's program, you happened to mention that there's a connection to transhumanism, this idea of modifying humans, experiments going on in secretive places, sometimes under the watchful eye of these higher entities where they are modifying humans to some end that remains mysterious to us right now, but that I think is going to play a role in the Antichrist. Now you look at the Vatican, and here's what is considered by many to be the largest Christian church organization in the world. And here just this week, by the way, they announced a conference on transhumanism because the Vatican is interested in working together towards this, using emergent technology. They even call it Humans 2.0, taking us into our next step in human evolution. We are co-creators with God. They've really bought in to a lot of that kind of theology. At the same time, as we did uncover in Exo Vaticana, which they also do in higher entities, there is an interest on the part of the Vatican to prepare mankind for an official disclosure moment. And some of their Opus Dei level theologians preparing doctrines saying that once revelation comes down to us from the heavens, from an alien source, actually talking about this, it may require us to modify certain ideas we have about Christianity and doctrine and theology and whatever. It's very scary stuff, but there it is at the Vatican. Both the transhumanist angle, which is connected to the alien deception agenda, I think, and also the idea that our space brothers are coming and we need to get ready for it.
One of the things that we're offering as an added bonus to the higher entities film when you obtain this through your donation to Skywatch TV is a 5 DVD set of interviews with theologians like Dr. Michael Heiser, the late Chuck Missler, one of the last interviews, if not the last interview Chuck gave on this particular topic. Joe Jordan, who works in deliverance ministry, people who are experiencing what they believe is alien abduction. But Joyce Ahrens, this is one of the most powerful interviews that I've ever encountered, and it kind of relates to what we're discussing here, the spiritual nature of this phenomenon. Joyce Ahrens, who I remember seeing on television on one of these paranormal series on cable back in the 90s. She was from Springfield, Missouri, not far from where we are now, and telling her story of how she and her family had been tormented by these entities for a long time. And it was through George Jordan and his CE4 research ministry that she was set free through the power of Jesus Christ. She tells her story tearfully, sharing how she was freed from the torment of these constant visits, she and her husband, her child. It's a powerful testimony and speaks to the nature of these entities. Wes, I think it gets back to what you said. There is no standard that we can apply to the accounts of contactees and abductees by which we can say this is a good thing for humanity. This is flat evil.
Right, but what we can see a commonality across the board is that they try to present themselves as being benevolent. And I think that's part of their deceptive quality as well. They will be presented as the saviors of mankind because they're so much more advanced than us, and so they want to come help us with our problems and intervene.
By taking people against their will and performing painful experiments on them. Again, the face-to-face encounters, not only in this documentary, but on the Project Stargate 5 DVD set, just some very powerful information, not presented like lectures, but again, in the context of face-to-face discussions with people who've come face-to-face with some of these things we're talking about.
There really isn't a better pair for this film. What people are going to get here is they're going to get personal encounters. We're not dealing with hearsay. We're dealing with personal encounters and some of the best researchers who have experienced these things firsthand, and then you've got people who have lived out these terrors.
Right.
We're not dealing with somebody who's just sitting in a room talking about something that they've read. This is real.
Yeah.
This is up close and personal. This is intimate. I probably shouldn't say this in front of Tom. I've got a few sets of the Researcher's Library, courtesy of Skywatch TV at my house. And Joe's like, why do you want this many sets? And I said, look, I want to have a set in my room for personal, but I also want to have another set out on the bookshelf in the house. Because here's the deal. When you have a complete set like this, it's been put together much like Project Stargate has. It's a complete set. It looks nice. It goes on the shelf. It's not only great content, but it's going to draw people's attention when they walk into your house. And that's one of the things that I wanted with the Researcher's Library. I wanted to have that on the shelf as soon as people walk in. That's one of the first things they're going to see on my bookshelf. And they always ask, what is this? And it opens up the discussion to talk about things that the average person doesn't know. And so with Project Stargate, it's kind of a researcher's library in and of itself, getting into the alien UFO phenomenon.
It's a way to open the door to people who may not be on the same page.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, too, because I have believed for some time, in fact, Skywatch Television, Defender Publishing, is kind of an outgrowth of a burden that I've had for a long time, that the church, bless their heart, often overlook some of the very topics that the millennials, the young people today, are hungry to get answers for. And it's an abdication on the part of the church to leave it up to the History Channel and other people, to mold your worldview in terms of explaining what this phenomenology is. And the more the government releases documents and our own Navy pilots trying to chase craft that are breaking all of the laws of physics and what is this? They definitely have questions. The church needs to deal with this. And I think this 5-volume set in the Higher Entities DVD would be a perfect choice for home study groups, for your church. Get these, play one interview at a time, play the movie, and then talk about it, and open up and just share. What do you believe this is? Do you believe that we're being visited by these higher entities as far as advanced aliens from, Krypton or whatever, or is something supernatural going on here? And why now is it increasing? What are we moving toward? There's an ominous sense about this, and it does feel, at least even from our own government, that we are totally moving towards an official disclosure moment.
The timing of this film couldn't be better because it's been just the last 18 months or so since a former Department of Defense official went to work for a for-profit company, and I'm not going to say the name of the company. They're getting enough publicity as it is from the mainstream media. But you've no doubt seen those stories in the media about, as Tom mentioned, Navy pilots chasing these craft. So it's growing in the public's awareness, but it's not being presented to the public as a spiritual event, as a spiritual phenomenon, which the contactees, their reports would indicate that it is, and especially the reports such as the research of Joe Jordan, which you'll see in the Project Stargate DVD interview, can be stopped by calling on the name of Jesus.
See, that's another point. Joe Jordan, his ministry, I was at Roswell some years ago when he brought in 2 or 3 people, got up and gave their testimony. They have something, it's over 200, I forget how many people now,
yes,
that were people that were habitually experiencing this demonic abduction, whatever, these things coming at night. They feel immobilized, they feel paralyzed, they're taken, inside these crafts, experiments are done on them. It's vivid to them, it's real to them. What they get mostly from the world and the church is, okay, well, if anything, it's, you're just insane and you probably need to see a psychiatrist. But here's the interesting part that Joe Jordan's been able to validate with over 200 cases now of people who accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior, then took authority over these entities in the name of Jesus Christ, and the abduction phenomenon stops. That is very, very telling.
And again, that's the testimony of Joyce Ahrens in the series. I had the opportunity to meet Joyce in a conference in Nashville with Joe Jordan some years back, and didn't know that I would someday have the opportunity, along with Josh Peck and Sharon Gilbert, to sit down and interview her and talk with her. And she was grateful for what Joe did, and very grateful that Skywatch TV was stepping out to present this topic to the public.
Our COO, Joe Ardis, watched some of these interviews, including the one with Joyce. I don't know if using the term unnerved is right, but it shook him. He was moved by it. It was powerful. It brought him to tears about what Jesus had done for this woman. But how vivid her story was utterly believable.
It is a real phenomenon. These higher entities, Justin, how do you think that they're, as we seem to be moving towards a disclosure moment with the government and their allies in the media presenting the secular story, how is this going to manifest in an unveiling, a revelation of the existence of these higher entities to the public?
I think back to when Jesus came in his first advent. He did so many things to show people undeniably that he was fully God and fully man. He did the miracles of God because he was and is God. And people would follow him. Crowds of people would just gather around Jesus because of all that he was doing and the revelation that he had. I think it's going to be something similar to this. I think that these entities are going to appear as ministers of righteousness. I believe that they're going to bring technology, things that will make our life easier. They'll bring doctrine, theology that makes sense to humanism. And it's going to be better than what the average person has. And here's the thing. You can have the best of the best of the best in worldly terms and it not be authentic in godly terms. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think that people who don't have Christ, this is going to be the closest thing to Christ they're ever going to get because they don't accept Jesus.
In the same way that the people along the Sea of Galilee tried to make Jesus king because he was giving them free bread.
It's going to be something similar, I believe. And Wes and I were talking about this the other day. There was a TV program, a remake of an older program called V. And in V, there was this thing that people really wanted from the alien queen. They wanted to experience her bliss. It sounds completely ridiculous to us, but people who don't have the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, they need some type of bliss. They need some type of peace. And what was amazing about this TV show is that people's bliss would only last for so long, and they had to get it again. It was momentarily given. And so I think that's going to be part of this scenario. I'm not saying it's going to be set up like the TV show, but it's kind of the scenario of that.
We've seen this depicted through science fiction programs a number of times. There's the dramatization of the Arthur C. Clarke film, short story, Childhood's End.
Yes.
But then also there was that famous episode of The Twilight Zone, where the Kennebec come and they give all of these gifts, these gifts of advanced medicine and free energy and this, that, and the other, and they're going to take humans to their home planet. And we've decoded this book that they dropped, and we see that it says to serve man. Well, see, they're totally beneficial. Right. You don't understand. It's a cookbook,
right.
And that's exactly what's going on here.
Right. Well, and you mentioned the sci-fi films. And again, I think, and all the Marvel comic films and Thor and the gods and all of that, what the subtle message behind a lot of that. In fact, in one of them, forget who the character was, he's the bad guy, but basically he's a godlike individual, and he says, you've known me by many names. You've known me as Jesus. You knew me as Buddha.
Right.
I've been revealed to humanity over time. So when this false Messiah comes, this one showing great signs and wonders, in as much as he could deceive the whole world, right? Yes. That these things will be so powerful. I don't think he would come attacking Jesus Christ. I think he will come expressing that he is Jesus, and we've also known him by a lot of other names down through time, and this is his second coming. And I think that the world right now, the second coming of the new age, as we've been calling it, but the world is ready for this, especially given the fact that the church, Western evangelical Christianity doctrine, people today hardly know the Bible at all. Statistics showing the average Christian never reads the Bible or rarely reads the Bible. We're set up. We are set up for a great delusion. And the Higher Entities documentary, I don't want to say it's spooky in the sense that it's scary, but the people that you guys went and met with, the fact that you had to go on the road, really, to meet with most of these individuals. You had to go to their place, and their connections to intelligence agencies and also deliverance ministries. Over and over, what I found in Higher Entities is this is something we better pay attention to now. I'm talking about the church.
Absolutely. And really quick, how this all ties into what Derek just said is that Stan Deyo in the film, and you see the emotion in this guy's face. Goodness, I was blown away. I mean, you don't just hear what he's saying, but I mean, this guy, he's holding on to some secrets. He made the comment that the group he was working with in Australia as a special agent with the FBI, and by the way, their program got overturned and just dismantled within a blink of an eye. But he talked about they were receiving technology for working with these entities. They were receiving technology. This is going right back to the main theme of what we're discussing here, of we come bearing gifts.
Sure. Well, Gary Stearman, who is part of the Project Stargate interviews that we're giving away, he tells his story in there of interacting with what you would think of as UFOs or aliens. But his family, of course, famous Stearman aircraft, World War II, that was the aircraft of choice for teaching pilots, how to fly, bought out by Boeing. But his uncle, who was one of the top people inside the Stearman Aircraft Company. He tries to retire, he gets drawn back in, he goes to work doing skunk work stuff. And Gary is very careful how he says this, but he definitely implies that there was some back engineering of what at least the government believed to be high alien technology.
What is Higher Entities about?
It's a personal investigation that started for me about 3 years ago, about an alleged group called the Collins Elite. And what we wanted to do was kind of go on location to talk with people who had the government security clearances, who worked on secret projects, or great researchers that are very seasoned who have looked into these things. We wanted to go and meet with people to find out exactly what they had experienced. Can they validate the existence of such a group as the Collins Elite? And furthermore, what other groups are out there, other scenarios that have taken place that would further validate these things about the Collins Elite. So that's really what this documentary was. It's a documentary that allows people to go on the road with us and to see the faces, the people who have experienced these things, to feel the emotion. This is a very intimate film. We have personal family stories from Tom Horn, things that I don't even know if you've ever told any stories like that on film before. We asked Tom, and we kind of surprised him. We said, Tom, remember those personal stories you told us back when we first met, back in 2010? And the emotion that gets pulled out of every person on camera It's unbelievable, Derek. This is not like our other films. Now, I love our past films, Belly of the Beast, Hollowworth Chronicles, but the difference here is that we're not just sitting in a studio putting up a bunch of motion pictures and images. This is driven by the emotion and experiences of everyone in the film.
More like guerrilla filmmaking. You go out, you interview people on location. In our case, it was out on our property, out in the country. You met with Stan Deo, I saw, up at his place in Colorado, Reverend Dr. Ray Boucher at his place.
Well, in a hotel room. He wouldn't meet us at his place.
Okay, right. And we talked about that in the first episode. The reason for the meeting in the hotel rather than at his place, because of his past encounter with this shadowy government group called the Collins Elite, which is so shadowy that that's not even its real name. In fact, it doesn't even have a real name as far as we know. But Wes, other than the style of the film differing from your past work, in this film you talked specifically with Christians only about a phenomenon that for many, most Christians don't see the spiritual connection, why Christians should even be involved in this. Why did you only interview Christians about the UFO phenomenon?
Well, it goes back to these higher entities, what the film's about, and you can trace them back through history, different civilizations. They appear to people in the forms of ascended masters or light beings or star children. They call them aliens today. We call them fallen angels based on what the Bible says about them. But the world has already given their answer for this. Is the thing. They have, and there's discrepancies within their answer. There's not one solid answer, and not everything's been revealed yet. But they've already given their answer, and ultimately it's to deter from the cross of Christ. Just as evolution was a shot at the cross before creation, this is doing the same thing, but in a different manner.
The message has changed and transformed over the years. And this is something we talked about a little bit in our first program. For example, in the 18th century, 17th century, the Swedish theologian and philosopher Emanuel Swedenborg believed he was in contact with angels who lived on the planet Venus and Jupiter. And in fact, there are still followers of Swedenborg today. It's a small group, but they've rebranded themselves from Swedenborgianism, which you can't even say. But they now call themselves the New Church. Blavatsky in the 19th century, Helena Blavatsky, believed that the ascended masters she was in contact with were on other worlds. Move into the 1950s, where the contactees believed they were hearing from entities now on the planets Venus or Jupiter or Saturn. And as we've expanded our knowledge about the universe through advanced astronomy, these entities move farther and farther away to places that we can't verify where there's actually anything there, because we know a lot more about Venus now than we did in 1955. So now they're coming from Zeta Reticuli or places like that. The story changes, and that alludes to what you said. They're not really telling us the truth.
Well, and also what's interesting, you mentioned the 1700s, 1600s. If you go back and look at the airships phenomenon of those early times and what they looked like, those manifestations were to somehow play off of their knowledge of technology. Even though they thought advanced technology, so it's a giant blimp-like looking thing with a propeller on the back, moving it through the air, right?
And there was a very famous UFO flap in the late 19th century in Texas, where they saw what looked to be a flying airship, a dirigible. But when you go back to, say, the 4th century BC in Alexander the Great, they were seeing flying shields. So it appears in a way that's culturally relevant or culturally understandable.
Well, and also, what's interesting then, because you only interviewed Christians, if you go back to the Bible, this is when you start getting a clear depiction, Ezekiel's wheel in the middle of the wheel, right? The Bible's description of these things that move back and forth from the throne of God, which also are cylindrical. They look like, they're described in language that sounds like space, flying saucers, like that. And yet the Bible makes us aware that these are living entities. And that brings it full circle, that what is going on with UFO manifestations and whatever is more spiritual than it is physical. It's interdimensional. And that agrees with the Bible, but that also goes back to following the 40s and the Collins Elite. And I don't know if you clarified earlier when we introed this show, who are the Collins Elite? This was a group inside the U.S. government, a working group, that came to believe that the UFO manifestations and the alien abduction phenomenon is demonic in the biblical sense of the word. And so far as we know, that group continues inside the U.S. government. They've been warning the U.S. government. Recent files that have been released, right, under FIOLA requests, showing this group inside the U.S. government warning them to be very, very careful in putting themselves into contact. Now, I'm one of the Christians who also was interviewed for this film, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but I do discuss, you know, why was I interested in this subject matter? And as a young preacher, I had to be really quiet about the fact that the phenomenon of alien abduction, as people were calling it, right, whatever that was, had touched my family. You know, my father had many years ago in the late 50s, I believe, had found these mysterious mountain holes, right? That we talk about that on the film, so I won't go into all the details. But right after that discovery, a few years later, Travis Walton is abducted, according to his Fire in the Sky story. And I've met Travis Walton, by the way, and I asked him if he knew about my dad's mountain holes. He didn't know anything about it. He didn't know it was in the same area, right? But the Sitgraves National Forest, that whole area, by the way, is called the Superstitious Mountains. And it is because it goes back to Indian stories about these bulbous-headed little men that they call bad medicine and said stay away from, sound like alien grays, but also doorways opening through which giants were moving back and forth. Again, we're talking about interdimensionality, not coming from Zeta Reticuli, but moving in and out of another dimension. Well, yeah, you know, and a lot of people, they describe, in fact, I think somebody's used the term journey interrupted or something like that, where, you know, I'm just this boy. We're growing up in El Mirage, Arizona, right? And my dad makes this strange discovery. The newspaper prints an article called Strange Mountain, or Mysterious Mountain Holes. You know, part of the Army Corps of Engineers go up with him. They dynamite all that. People hear this on the video. But it was just a few weeks after that. My sister is 13. She just starts menstruating. And as I understand it, that's also key to a lot of this abduction phenomenon. There seems to be something about blood that these entities are interested in. But I'm a little boy right in the middle of the night, man. I wake up, my sister's just screaming, blood-curdling screams. I jump out of bed, run in her room. Here comes my dad and mom. I never knew until years later, really, what had happened that evening, because mom made me just leave the room. She went in there, put a Bible under my sister's pillow, which is something people used to do, right? And sleeps with her that night. But years later, mom and my sister tell me that she had woke up and there were these three bulbous-headed little tiny entities that were standing around her bed. And they were communicating in a way that she couldn't figure it out. She felt paralyzed. And so it's almost like she's in one of these waking dreams, right, where she's trying to move and can't. And finally, when she breaks through, she starts screaming, and that's when we all run in there. That phenomenon started. It very much matched what people have described as alien abduction. I didn't know till years later it continued through her whole life. She wasn't a Christian. She wasn't following the Lord. So I had questions about it, and here I was. Now I'm a pastor. I'm pastoring different churches. I had nowhere to go. I couldn't talk to anybody about this, right? Pastor of a fairly large church with 20-some pastors on staff with me, right, in California. I'm not going to stand up in front of my audience or go on TV or something and say, hey, can you help me figure out what's going on with my alien abducted sister? They would have just thought it was a fruit, right? And so nowhere to go, just kept it quiet in the back of my mind. And then finally, Dr. Ida E. Thomas publishes a book called The Omega Conspiracy, and it was the first Christian book I had ever seen or read in which he was really trying to deal with this situation, but from a solid biblical worldview as a university professor. He and I became friends later. In fact, I wound up publishing his book in the 3rd or 4th edition, and it's still in print today. So he started answering some questions for me. Okay, just fast forward. People can get the higher entities if you want the whole story. Fast forward years later, my sister marries a man. He's a nuclear physicist. He's working for General Dynamics in California, doing above top secret work. And then later he has moved to Los Alamos National Laboratory, right, in New Mexico, which is very connected to Dulce and a lot of this stuff that's been mentioned already in earlier programs about these entities, these underground locations where the government has made a deal with the devil, some people are saying, right? But he's working there. He comes home one night. My sister's been drinking. He starts drinking with her. They both get drunk, and then she tells him this story. Since I was a little girl, you need to know that I've been having this experience. He surprises her by saying, I'm fully aware of that. I know about your life. I know about this situation. And he starts sharing stuff she's never ever told me. She's afraid to. But she starts telling me stuff he told her about what they were doing at Los Alamos National Laboratory, connected to this whole alien abduction phenomenon. The next day, he heads off for the lab. He is never heard from again. She starts freaking out. He's gone. A week goes by. She's calling them, and they're telling her, we don't know anything about it. They finally say to her, well, he actually died on the job in an accident, and we cannot release the body for secrecy reasons. So she's freaking out because she's trying to get his Social Security benefits now. If he's dead, right, she's got no support. They wouldn't help her at all. But her daughter, who also had started experiencing this same phenomenon, because it's a generational type thing, right? Neither one of them are following the Lord. She starts having the same experience, but now she's a federal employee with the Social Security Division. So she starts shaking the chains, rattling the bells up the line inside the government about, my mom needs to draw Social Security, can't do it without a death certificate, right? And then lo and behold, magico presto, you can have his Social Security benefits, you can have the retirement, you can have it all, but we're not giving you the body and we're not issuing a death certificate. He's never been seen again.
These are the secrets that are being covered up. Yeah, this is really the backbone of higher entities, is this idea that there are departments in the government that are strategically working with entities. Now, the average Christian hears something like that, and they just want to throw it out the window and say, whoa.
This is all crazy talk. This is scary. I don't want to deal with this. Is not showing me how I can live my best life today.
But I mean,
this is irrelevant. Yeah.
If there was nothing to this, there would be no need for conspiracy-surrounded deaths in your family. There would be no need. Looking at the faces of everyone that we've interviewed in this film, there's pain.
There is. And by the way, my sister, not to go on here too much longer, but she did eventually give her life to the Lord. And just like Joe Jordan's patients, is that a good term, the people he's worked with, when she accepted Jesus Christ as her Savior and took authority over that in the name of Jesus Christ, it stopped. So there is definitely a connection there. It's very mysterious. I was really surprised, by the way, that you somehow drew Stan Deyo. He's been very quiet in recent years. And until my house burned down in 2011, I had an old newspaper clipping. It was either from Britain or Australia, but it had a professor. It was a big feature article in a big national newspaper. Had this professor and Stan Deyo standing behind him, and it was talking about the work they were doing in anti-gravitical flight research. So I know Stan was definitely involved in some of these laboratories and some of the work that was being done connected to evidently what continues in our U.S. government in this, either the research. I saw a congressman on TV a few days ago, and he said once he saw the files that have yet to be released on some of this UFO activity, he said it is very, very concerning that we have something in our atmosphere that we have no control over whatsoever and can't even define.
But as I think we can conclude, though, from what you guys found from your interviews with Reverend Dr. Ray Boucher, who was the contactee for this shadowy group called the Collins Elite, that there are groups within the government that don't share information back and forth. Because if there was a government agency involved in what was happening in your family's experience, government agencies perhaps involved in other aspects of these contacts with these entities, and yet the Collins Elite, which was an interdepartmental group that ranged across a variety of government agencies, had no knowledge of what this other unknown, unidentified group was doing. This is concerning. There's a researcher I've interviewed several times who specializes in researching the occult, and he says it is his opinion that after World War II, perhaps because of the scientists brought out of Nazi Germany via the rat lines, or perhaps the reason that they were brought out was to facilitate what groups inside the government already wanted to do. But essentially, groups inside the United States government literally sold our collective soul, or their collective soul, to the devil or the devils in exchange for secret technology, secret knowledge, secret information, or secret access to what they believed to be information not available to others.
And doesn't that sound very much like the first arrival of the Watchers?
Yes,
who
it does.
traded technology,
Spot on.
right?
Exactly.
Whether it was sorcery and how to use drugs for expanding your mind to make contact with these higher entities, or warfare, metallurgy, all the things that they traded in exchange for DNA, blood, the opportunity to mingle, and of course, Daniel, we referred to in the first program, talking about he's going to worship an alien god, but he also says they will mingle themselves with the seeds of men.
Right.
If they're not men and they're mingling themselves with the seeds of men, what is it that Daniel is talking about here? And of course, that goes into some of the higher entities program that you've produced.
With just about a minute or so left, fellows, if you want to take a stab at this, what do you hope Christians take away from the film Higher Entities?
Getting the package through Skywatch, they're going to get a whole lot of information, because they're also going to get the Project Stargate collection. And with the Project Stargate collection and Higher Entities, you're going to be up close and personal in the discussion. You're not going to be watching this from afar off. You're going to be up in it. You're going to see the emotion. You're going to experience what some people would call ghost stories, Derek.
Right.
I mean, the chilling feeling that you have sitting around the campfire when you're a kid, hearing stories of ghosts that don't exist. The difference here is that this does exist, and that Christians are going to be able to now have information to provide answers to this question. As Christians, we should never be scared to jump in and join the conversation on these hot topics. Really, we have this calling to be able to answer the questions, always ready to give an account. And so I'm really excited that we have this package that we've put together with you guys with the Stargate collection and the Higher Entities, because this is literally a grand slam package. Not only are you going to get this creative film done in an 80s film format with Higher Entities, we've gone with the retro look, but you're getting these firsthand encounters as well through everyone in the Stargate package. I just want to say Ellie Marzulli, Gary Stearman, Daryl Sims, which hopefully at some point you can tell the story of Daryl Sims. You got Joe Jordan, Paul McGuire, Stan Deo, Joyce Aarons, Chris Putnam, Michael Heiser, Russ Dizdar, Chuck Missler, and of course Guy Malone. All-star line. They came up with some type of an agreement. It was like a treaty, basically. Some type of an agreement between the American government and this, what they were deeming to be an alien race.
I was aware that we had made a deal that we would give them infrastructure, hiding places, labs, out of the human sight. I've been let privy to things that these people would be killed for if I named them.
It was not only unethical and immoral, but that it was a program that was really connected with the demonic, with satanic forces.
So the Collins elites start to get this information, to start arguing to the point where no. These things, these beings have been summoned demonically through satanic ritual. But there's not a lot of people listening.
These guys, with the resources that the U.S. government has, should have known that. They had access to people who could have told them that. So the question to ask is, why did they come up with the conclusion they did?
Finally, Los Alamos called her, and they said he died in a tragic accident, the details of which cannot be reviewed, and the body cannot be recovered. And that's why I'm telling you, be careful how hard you push, how far you push.
He has witnessed the 10-foot giants and referred to themselves as the Nephilim, said that they were preparing for an intergalactic war with God, and they believed that they were going to win.
This goes back to the beginning of civilization.
Higher entities have been controlling and manipulating the governments of mankind. There's no evidence that this has stopped.